Deaf people can't compete in the Paralympics because they need another eligible disability. The more I looked into this, the more I realised that deaf people or deaf athletes are kind of on their own. The Olympics formally started around 1896. The Paralympics started in 1960, but the Deaflympics started in 1924. So that's 36 years before the Paralympics. But deaf isn't a category in the Paralympics. For context, I grew up half deaf and I went half blind in 2020, so blind in this eye, deaf in this ear. I started learning sign language, or BSL specifically, British Sign Language, about 5 months ago now. But as someone new to deaf culture, I've looked at lots of videos and watched lots of different resources to learn as much as I can about the deaf community. That includes lots of Zoom calls, lots of meetups at cafes, but there's one specific video about the Deaflympics that I've used for this video, which I'll leave a link in the description below. But before I watched that video, I actually wanted to understand what the Paralympic categories were all about. There are 10 categories, 8 physical, 1 visual, and 1 intellectual. The IPC, or International Paralympic Committee, do give some descriptions on the website, but the International Sports Federation for that sport decides if an impairment is eligible or not, because some impairments might not be severe enough. Or, in other words, a person might not be disabled enough. This is referred to as minimum impairment criteria, things like maximum height for a short stature athlete, or level of amputation. But then the athletes are split up into classes for each individual sport. That is why you may see different classifications in the same class in a sport, because the sporting impact will be different. However, some of the impairments change, and the assessments also shift and change as time goes on. This gold medalist from London 2012 with complex pain syndrome was deemed not disabled enough a few years later, so ended their archery career. This gold medalist from London 2012 with cerebral palsy was also classed as not disabled enough, ending their career. And there are various other examples of this. But some people compete that aren't disabled enough. The most high priority scandal in the Paralympics was the Spanish basketball team. 10 of the 12 players weren't intellectually disabled for the intellectually disabled basketball. At the moment, participants see 2 classifiers who are qualified physicians, physiotherapists, sports coaches, sports scientists, etc. to test their impairment. The qualifications are determined by the International Sports Federation, which in some cases, like the Spanish basketball team, can be manipulated. But the Olympics has similar issues with drugs and doping. That's why the Enhanced Games has been such a hot topic recently in elite sport. Basically, a drugged Olympics. The website says, "We believe that science and technology are fair advantages when used safely." So the Paralympic categories aren't straightforward. The Olympic drug and doping situation isn't exactly solved, which begs the question, what makes the Deaflympics different? This actor played the role of a deaf person and in an interview said this.
It was one of the most enriching and mind-blowing experiences of my life. I'm so grateful to my sign instructor, Jeremy Lee Stone, who was really my mentor in introducing me to deaf culture. And really the biggest takeaway for me was that deafness isn't a disability, it is a culture. It's a way of being in the world.
Which, from my experience speaking to deaf people, isn't entirely accurate. Speaking from my experience as someone that's half deaf, I struggle in loud spaces, loud environments. I rely on lip reading a lot, so when mouths are covered by hands or objects or masks, communication becomes extremely difficult. Or when people turn to the side, so you only see half their face, or when teachers turn around to write something on the board whilst talking, I can't lip read if I can't see your lips. It's similar when you're outside and you've got the sun behind the person talking, it's just a big bright white light, or windows that are open. It's so hard to lip read. Clubbing, dark room, flashing lights, drunk lips, as a half-deaf person, yeah, no, it's almost impossible. If I drink, it is impossible. I can't lip read whilst drunk. For me, someone walking on my right, my deaf side, isn't great because I need to look at them. But if I'm looking at them or slightly behind them so I can see what they're saying, I'm not looking forwards, which obviously isn't ideal, especially when you need to cross a road. Sitting down at meals, again, I need people on my left side or directly in front of me. If they're on the right, I will miss what it is that they're saying. Even editing these videos, sometimes the microphone only plays audio through one ear. If it's my left ear, I don't notice it's not playing through two ears. So I get comments after the video on YouTube saying, oh, you've messed up the audio, or you've done this wrong, or I send the video to my editor and my editor's like, audio? Yes, there is a deaf culture, a deaf community, but with the world that we live in, deafness disables me from being parts of some conversations and situations. Just think about the amount of websites or ads where it says, call us on and give you a number. That doesn't help a deaf person, they can't hear. Call 999 in a case of an emergency? No, they need to text or use something called Sign Live in the UK at least, where they get an interpreter. Fingers crossed there's one available at the time that there's an emergency. And a situation driving me nuts at the moment, I coach trampoline, and one of the people is deaf. And to book them into a session, they need to call to book their spot. There's no email option. There's no text option. They have to call. But both parents and the individual that wants to participate are deaf. They can't call. So I have to call on their behalf. With my good ear. Now, although this video is over a decade old and technology has improved and got better, I still think it helped me relate to those with cochlear implants.
Take the example of a lecture. This is what you hear.
Were either to just move the left finger, a little finger wiggly on the left side of space.
This is the auditory input that cochlear implant provides me. My brain has to work overtime to fill in the gaps so that I can understand.
And granted, my experience is very different. I did find myself nodding like the Churchill ad to what she was saying about being in the pub.
My implant has even more difficulty going down the pub. This is what you hear.
Those two versions I said are very natural, whereas
This is what I hear. The key problem is the background noise. The cochlear implant is unable to filter the sound so that I can hear what I want. Instead, I am bombarded by all the sound. In this situation, I feel useless because all I can do is watch people's lips move. Although I am skilled at lip reading, it is not possible to understand every word.
I'm not quite sure, but Joe's looking very confused, or just strange. Perhaps Joe's normal face, but
Confused face.
confused face.
Yeah, don't worry. I also spoke to my dad recently about this, and it's not a one-off situation. This scenario repeats itself time and time again. People lose patience and draw away and stop communicating with deaf athletes because it becomes burdensome. However, deaf people are able-bodied. Deaf people have competed at the Olympics, having got over some of the communication struggles. Working with interpreters for officials and travel and food, just everyday communication. But interpreters are expensive. I was reading this article which said, in the UK, the government axed all funding to elite deaf athletes in the name of creating more Olympic and Paralympic medal winners at London 2012. If I understand that right, then deaf athletes that want to compete in the Olympics need to pay for their own interpreters. Maybe they could take a volunteer interpreter as part of their coaching team? I don't know, I'm just guessing here, but it seems very odd. My point here is that deaf people aren't disabled, but when included in the hearing world, they can be disabled from participating in some situations. It is said that the rules of the game don't need to be adapted for deaf people, but the environment does. Now, I think this idea is wider reaching. Organism-environment relationship. I spoke about this in a video essay about ecological psychology, but reading this article about the Deaflympics really helped me grasp a better understanding of what the Deaflympics is about. In the Paralympic Games, there are many more competitions due to the classification system, so actually there are many mini-games within the Paralympic Games. If deaf athletes take part, there would be still another mini-games with one major difference. The deaf athletes would still be segregated from all other disabled athletes due to their communication difference. The very purpose of the games, to bring athletes together, would be lost. Now, we could discuss disability for hours. Maybe we agree, maybe we don't. We could also discuss categories and classifications and classes in sport. Maybe we agree, maybe we don't. But I think of the Olympics, the Paralympics, and the Deaflympics completely different. For three main reasons. 1, awareness. 2, TV. It's on TV, the Olympics and Paralympics. The Deaflympics, not so much. And 3, which is the biggest one for me, funding. So, how do we move forwards? Going all the way back to Eugene Rubens' case, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, the Deaflympics was about helping deaf people compete, but also bringing deaf people together. You need hearing loss of at least 55 decibels in the good ear, so I wouldn't be able to compete because my left ear is too good. But I think that actually brings the deaf people together because sign language is the first language. Everyone uses sign language to communicate. If you don't know sign language, you would struggle. In football, they use flags instead of whistles. In running races, they use flashing lights instead of a start gun. Now, the Deaflympics could have joined the Paralympics, but the organisers pulled out for 3 main reasons. Reason 1 is deaf sport would be reduced because there will be too many people and too many sports in the Paralympics if all of the deaf sports was to be included. I understand the logic, but I don't think that's fair at all because that's almost 2,500 people that might not be able to compete in their sport. The next reason was loss of control over deaf sport because the Paralympics wanted to have control. I would recommend you watching the documentary I linked in the description for more information. But the third reason, again, as I'm sure you can imagine, is cost. Interpreters are expensive, and in the Paralympics you would need lots and lots and lots of interpreters. Unfortunately, because of the way the world works, that is the biggest barrier, funding. Looking into the history of deaf sport, there are some questionable decisions being made at the top. In the 2011 Switzerland Winter Games, there was some embezzling issues. In the 2013 Athens Games, it was almost cancelled, but had to be moved to Bulgaria in the last minute. Contracts for government support has been slowly decreasing, and there's almost no government support now for the Deaflympics, which might be related to the 2018 incident where the president of Deaf Sport was sent to prison for embezzlement. The IOC also then stopped the funding in July 2018. But then to top it all off, national governing bodies of sport also don't fund deaf athletes. A recent article talking about UK sport funding said this: in the UK, Paralympic and Olympic athletes benefit from hundreds of millions of pounds of government and national lottery funding, but elite deaf athletes receive nothing at all. There is talk of some funding for UK deaf sport, a commitment of 1.27 million until 2027. Now, that is a good sign, but it's not enough for most of the deaf people that are getting active in sport or elite sport. Again, I'm going to recommend that you read the article linked in the description and read some of the stories because, wow. As a sports coach, as someone that coaches a deaf person on trampoline, no, trampoline isn't in the Deaflympics. Trampoline is not even in the Paralympics either. I'm looking at coach education. More deaf coaches, but also coaches for the deaf. More environments for deaf people to be active. This quote from a BG Deaf Olympian says more than I could ever say. Right now, I don't wear a single piece of GB kit because I no longer feel like I represent my country, only myself. I know I'm making mistakes. I'm learning, I'm trying, but it would be really nice to get some support from the people a bit higher up. UK Deaf Sport are currently campaigning for 3 million up until 2027, at least until 2025 for the next Deaflympics, because at the moment we might not have enough money to fund all of the Deaflympians to go to Tokyo. Ukraine paid the Deaflympians and were the top nation in Brazil, the last Deaflympics. From what I can see, the US don't fund Deaflympians either. With all the talk about inclusion and equality and equity, unless I'm missing something, I feel like the deaf people are sort of left on their own.